If you're a fan of horse racing, college football, or college basketball, there is a very good chance you know my guest today, a great broadcaster and storyteller who had an amazing 22-year run at ESPN, the great Jeannine Edwards. Jeannine, as you know, college football season is just around the corner, and your husband is the linebackers coach at Wake Forest. And of course, you are a huge fan of the team. So I got to ask, what is your outlook on the upcoming season for the Demon Deacons?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. It's that's what everybody wants to know. It's going to be an interesting season because we have so many new pieces and parts, and we have an exciting new quarterback transfer, Hank Bachmeier, who came in. He's he started at Boise State and then he went to La Tech, and he's got an arm, he can make the throws. So and we also have Michael Kern, and he's been with the program for several years. Such a fantastic leader, did a wonderful job last year. So we're excited to see what the offense can do. But my husband, he has high hopes for his linebacker unit. He's got some really talented guys coming back and a couple of new guys that have joined the team. And training camp is what, day 4, 5, maybe 6 of training camp, and they're doing really well. So I think that, we want to get to a bowl game since we just missed going to one last year. So I think everybody will kind of be relieved if we can get over that hump and get to 6 wins. But, obviously nobody's satisfied with that. They'd obviously love to win the ACC if they could. But, I think honestly, if we could win 7, 8 games, I think that would be a decent season, considering that we're sort of in a transition year.
Well, I'll say this, I'm actually a Boise State fan. I've been a Boise
Oh,
State fan my whole life, so I'm really rooting for Hank. I hope he does well. So hope you guys do
yeah.
well this season.
Yeah, thank you. And he's such a nice kid. He's a really good kid. I've enjoyed getting to know him, meeting him, talking to him. The nutritionist for the football team, she started a new thing in the spring. She was having weekly cooking classes for the players, and it was all voluntary, but we had a ton of guys come, and I was helping her with that. Speaking of baking and cooking, and Hank was there, and so all the guys loved the cooking classes. I got to say, Tiffany Campbell did a great job putting all that together. So it was really neat to see them be interested in something other than football. And not only that, but when you think about it, it's a life skill that these guys can learn, just some simple, basic things about cooking and preparing their food and easy recipes. They can use that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Let's get into a bit of your background now. You first got into horse racing by watching 1978 Triple Crown winner Affirmed, as well as his rival, Aladar. So, what was it about those horses that just made you fall in love with racing?
Wow, that's, probably I was just at that age, very young, impressionable, and looking for something to excite me. My younger sister Carrie and I, we were, 8, 10, 12 years old, and, Secretariat had won the Triple Crown years before, but I think we were a little too young for him. But when Affirmed and Alydar came along, it just captivated me. And who doesn't love a great rivalry? And the other part of the story was the young jockey, Steve Cawthon, who was riding Affirmed. He was only 16 years old. And I thought he was kind of cute. And so it was just neat to follow their whole journey throughout the Triple Crown and follow the 2 horses as they continued their careers into their 4-year-old seasons, which was neat to see. And it was a really great rivalry for the sport of racing. It kind of ignited the whole sport. So after that, I was just hooked, and I had always loved horses. And so I decided then that I just wanted to get into horse racing somehow.
Speaking of being 16, when you were 16, you got to be a hot walker in the summer for the great horse trainer Leroy Jolly. You worked with him for 2 summers. What
Mhm.
memories do you have from those experiences?
Well, first of all, my parents weren't too thrilled about me going to work on the backstretch at the racetrack, but I was just really, really obsessed with it. And I was just determined I wanted to do it. And fortunately for me, and which also made my mom and dad feel better, was that my mom's uncle lived not far from Belmont Park. So I could stay with him, and that kind of gave me a safe place to be. And, I rode my bike to work. I couldn't drive yet. And just remember working for Leroy, it happened to be the year that he won the Kentucky Derby with Genuine Risk. There was so much buzz in the barn. It was so exciting to have that filly in the barn. And he had a lot of other really nice stakes horses. Jack Klugman from The Odd Couple, the actor, he had a really nice horse with Leroy at the time. And so Jack Klugman came to Saratoga for the summer. So he was at the barn just about every day. And I was just a hot walker. I was just learning the ropes of how to deal with thoroughbred racehorses. And I loved every minute of it. It was exhausting. My arms were full of scars and all bitten up from the horses biting me because I didn't know yet how to handle them and, get away from their teeth sometimes. But it was a wonderful experience and something I'll never forget. Just a really neat time to be on the backside at that point.
You also got to work with Fred Hooper. What was that like?
Well, Fred was an icon, and he was just one of those old people, old money guys that made a really good living in an industry down in Alabama. He was from Alabama, and he loved horse racing, and he loved doing things the traditional way, just loved breeding horses. He had a real reverence for horses and for the sport. And so I got a job on his farm, Hooper Farm in Ocala, Florida. And that's where I learned to ride racehorses and break yearlings and gallop horses. So he gave me my first job doing that. I worked on the farm for about a year. And then when they sent a string of 2-year-olds to New York, to Belmont Park to run there, they asked me if I wanted to go and be one of the exercise riders. And so I got to do that. And then several years later, Fred actually called me and asked if I would be interested in taking a small string for him to Tampa Bay Downs of horses that he wanted to race. And he offered me a job training for him. So he was a wonderful man. He just was an icon of the sport of horse racing. He did a lot of nice things for me. I always will have fond memories of working for him, and it just gave me a really neat, it was a short career in racing for me, but it then led to my second career, which was in the broadcasting end of things. So just, I'm really grateful for all the opportunities that I was given along the way.
Yeah, yeah, and as you mentioned, quite a while later, you ended up moving to Maryland, and you started working at the tracks there as the in-house TV host at the tracks,
Mhm.
and then that kind of led to you getting hired by ESPN. When you got hired by ESPN, when that moment happened, what was your reaction?
I was shocked because I really had no live television experience other than just doing some of the simulcast shows at Laurel and Pimlico, which was a totally different ball game. I mean, it's a little bit less eyeballs, if you will, and you're more just sort of reacting to what you're seeing as you're in the paddock and giving sort of pre-race analysis. But in my mind, wow, this was big time. And they asked me if I would be willing to commute from Maryland to Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is where the studio was. And it was a studio show, live studio show of horse racing. And so I was nervous, and I didn't really know the first thing about television or wearing an earpiece or hearing the producer in your ear as you're talking or live on the air. And I didn't go to school for broadcasting or journalism. I had really no foundational knowledge of how it all works. I just had my experience in racing that gave me a really in-depth knowledge of horses and racing. And then the little bit of TV work that I had done at Laurel and Pimlico, which kind of gave me a springboard to the next step, which was working for the network. And it was something that was nerve-wracking at first, but I learned a lot. I got to work with some wonderful anchors who were so helpful to me, like Al Jerkins out there in Tulsa, and Jeff Metters and Kenny Rice, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some others, but just wonderful guys who are pillars of the game, really, of the sport. And were very good to me and helped me kind of get my feet wet and learn as we went along.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you got to work with Kenny Rice. You and him co-hosted Today at the Races, and you
Yes.
and Kenny have talked about in the past how it was a very fast-paced show. Sometimes, there would be issues there, like the track audio wouldn't come through, and
Right.
and then you
Yeah.
and Kenny would almost have to like call the races yourselves. Just how important was it to get experience in those situations where you do have to improvise and keep your composure in those scenarios?
I'll tell you, the very first show that I worked on for ESPN that they hired me for initially was called the National Best Seven. And it was a live 1 hour show with 7 live races from different tracks all around the country. And they would bounce around. And, they were supposed to be the best races of the day. But as you say, inevitably there's going to be technical difficulties somewhere, or maybe horses are resistant to load in the starting gate, or something happens in the post parade, so then that race gets delayed, and then you're like backing up into the next race, which is going off at a different track like halfway across the country. So then we would be taping one race while we're showing the other race and then playing it back. Sometimes it was extremely chaotic, but for someone who had never done live television, it was probably the worst case scenario for me, but ended up being the best case scenario because I had to learn quick, and all sorts of different scenarios were being thrown at us. And it ended up being a very educational and insightful, formative experience very early in my career.
Mm. Are there any specific examples you can recall from when you were covering college sports where having those prior experiences working through issues on the horse racing telecasts really helped out?
Oh yeah. Oh geez. I mean, it's just so many crazy things can happen during a football or basketball game. I would say probably more so with football, just because the games are so much longer, and there are so many, crazy plays that can happen where you might be standing on one sideline because you think most of the action is happening on, with that team, and then something crazy happens and you got to run all the way around the field to the other sideline to try and catch up with what's going on, whether it's an injury or just, 2 interceptions in a row, and all of a sudden the defensive coach is going berserk. Or there was always really interesting, chaotic things going on that you had to be ready for anything. Or even in a post-game situation on the field when there's a huge upset and you might have fans running onto the football field and you're in the middle of just this sea of people. And when you're at ground level in a sea of people, as you can imagine, it's almost impossible to find who you're looking for. You're looking for the head coach. You're looking for your camera guy, who may not always be right next to you. And it's almost impossible to find them. And you have basically 20 seconds or whatever to find who you're needing to get to. So you don't have the vantage point of being up in the booth where you can kind of see down and see what's going on. So that was always nerve-wracking to me, is that when we'd have a really, really exciting finish and things would just blow up on the field and you'd be amongst a sea of people, and just hope and pray that you can find the person you're looking for and be there when the producer needs to come to you for a live interview or whatever.
Well, that's the beauty of live television, right? You never know what can happen.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And covering horse racing, I will say, when I did start then going on site instead of doing the studio shows, when I started becoming a reporter and going on site to cover ESPN's horse racing shows, unfortunately and sadly, a part of the sport was occasionally we would have an accident where a horse would break down. And so especially on big days and big races, those things are always so tragic and so awful. And just you want to keep your composure, and you want to stay in the moment and do what you need to do to get the information and get the facts and report it to the audience. But then the horse lover in you is really, it's very unnerving sometimes to see a situation like that unfold. And sadly, it is a part of the sport sometimes. So those were always very difficult, nerve-wracking situations to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to, keep your composure in those scenarios is, it's very important. Another thing that I really think makes you such a great broadcaster is your creativity, because I was looking back at some of the stuff you do with your live shots, and you would find ways to make it interesting, make it fun, you would do it in
Thank
cool
you.
locations, interacting
Thank
with your
you.
surroundings. Like, I just think that stuff is so awesome.
Well, I have to say that I spent several years working with a field producer at ESPN, and she is an associate producer on Sports Center, and she's been there for, I think, 25 years. Chris Kugler. And she ended up being my field producer when we would go on the road to do college football coverage. And she is just as creative, if not more creative than I am. And so she and I would brainstorm, and we would come up, we would say, okay, what can we do here covering this team? We're at Michigan or we're at Ohio State or whatever. What can we do to make this fun and interesting, but not silly, not superfluous or stupid, but something that at least is a little bit entertaining for the viewers, but at the same time, we're delivering information that they want to know about, things that they want to hear before the game and find out about. And so I think she and I made a really great team, and our bosses at ESPN, they were always very pleased with our work, and I think they thought we made a good pair. So we spent several years doing that, and we had a lot of fun.
Yeah. As someone who was born and raised in Dallas, I think it's so amazing that you did a live shot from the Texas Star Ferris wheel at the
Oh, you
fair
saw that.
for yeah, for OU Texas. I thought that was amazing.
Thank you. And I have to say, like, whenever we did hits like that, there were so many people behind the scenes that would make those things happen for us. It wasn't just us. We would, of course, try to contact people days in advance. We had to get a hold of the people at the Texas State Fair. The Ferris wheel, of course, is not running at 5 in the morning or 6 or whenever we did that live shot. It was very early in the morning. If you remember, it was dark.
Hmm.
Um, People had to come in to work to be there to run that for us. So there was always people behind the scenes connected with the venue wherever we were that we would get a hold of and do some advance work. And almost everybody, no matter where we were, people were so willing to be so accommodating. I think another live shot that I did for that game as well, it might not have been that same year, but it was for the Cotton Bowl, and they have pig races there as part of the state fair.
Yep, yep.
And we wanted to do a live pig race for one of my live shots, but the pigs were not there at that time of day. Well, we called the people that have the pigs, and these farmers, these guys, they actually came and brought the pigs early in the day and did a little fake race for us, just live for Sports Center, just for, I mean, how nice is that? So without people at each venue or school or wherever we happen to be, without them being willing to help us and go along with some of these crazy ideas that we had, none of that stuff would have happened. So I appreciate you recognizing some of those things, but there were so many people that went into just like a 2-minute report on Sports Center. You have no idea how many people it would take sometimes to pull some of that stuff off.
Hmm. I now want to dive into some particular stories and events that you covered throughout your career. You, of course, as you know, you covered the tragic story of a Barbaro, and you've said in the past that it's one of those stories that will change you forever. So, looking back now in 2024, what impact did it have on you at the time, and how does it impact you today?
Well, yeah, that's neat that you bring that up because it is one of those stories where, as I mentioned before, being a horse lover, having been involved in the sport very intimately, working with the horses day after day after day on the racetrack, and then covering the sport as a journalist, and just knowing what goes into the preparation of these racehorses and seeing the tragic injury and how the whole world was captivated with his story and with just the horrible nature of the injury and how graphic and gruesome it was. And the endeavor, not only by the surgeon and the people at the hospital there in Pennsylvania, but the owners of Barbaro who were willing to pay whatever it took and do whatever they could as long as it was in the best interest of the horse. And the entire world was waiting with bated breath every day or every week or once a month, whenever there was an update on this horse's condition. And because I lived the closest to the New Bolton Center, the hospital there, I, of course, and being the horse racing person, I was the one that was covering the story for 8 months. And I was doing reports for ABC World News. I was doing reports for Good Morning America. I was doing, tons of reports for ESPN and Sports Center. And you become so invested in, okay, how is this going to end up? Because I really hope we're going to have a happy ending here, because people are becoming attached to this horse and his story. And then when I found out, when that day came, when I got the call that, they were going to be putting him down, it was crushing. It was absolutely crushing. And you could see the pain and the sense of defeat in the eyes of Barbaro's owners and his surgeon and everyone at that hospital that took care of him for 8 months. And it touched all of us. I'm sure I'm not the only one. It touched all of us. And it was a very difficult few days to have to convey the events and convey the facts and what happened and why it happened, and then to sit down with Dr. Richardson, the surgeon, after the fact and do an interview with him, and he got very emotional. So you learn a lot about covering things from an emotional aspect and respecting people's feelings and respecting, I think, the hopes and dreams of the viewers and the fans who had become so attached to this horse and his story. And then you feel like you're letting them down when you have to then ultimately give this tragic news. And that was just me as the reporter. I can't even imagine what it felt like being the surgeon or the people that were taking care of him or his owners or trainers. So there were just so many emotional elements to that story. And, I hope people never forget how deeply so many people cared for that horse and really did try to save his life. And it was a very noble endeavor that ultimately didn't work out. But it taught us a lot about love and how animals can bring people together and how we should always have hope. So it just, it's just something that is very touching, and it's still touching for me today, many years later.
Another massive event you covered was American Pharaoh's Triple Crown 2015. You had
Mhm.
covered 9 previous attempts at a Triple Crown. So
Can
on
you
that field,
imagine? Can you imagine that?
yeah, it's
I
it's
mean,
crazy.
I thought it was never going to happen. Really thought it was never going to happen. And, we had gone for just such a dry spell there. it was what, 36 years? I mean, it was incredible. I didn't know that it was going to happen in my lifetime. And I was really hoping it would happen while I was still a broadcaster and that while we were still covering the races. I was really hoping after all those years of covering the Triple Crown races that, we might get to see it. And thankfully we did. And it was a remarkable run. It was a wonderful story. It was one of the highlights of my career to get to just follow that horse and his story. And just to see how, again, how deeply moved and touched horse racing fans became about American Pharoah and how much they loved him. Even people that really weren't horse racing fans, they were talking about the horse and, oh, I love that horse. And that horse is stunning. He's so beautiful. And he was. And he had the sweetest, most gentle personality. And I really think he changed forever. His trainer, Bob Baffert, there were a lot of things that were going on, because Bob had suffered a heart attack not long before that. And just his whole perspective and outlook on life changed. And that horse came along, and it was a wonderful thing for horse racing. It was a wonderful thing for sports in general. And it was certainly a wonderful privilege and honor for me to get to cover his story.
If you could go back in time and tell your younger self who watched Affirmed win the Triple Crown that she would end up covering the next Triple Crown victory 37 years later, what do you think she would say in response?
Oh my gosh. That is so amazing that you put it like that, because I would never have even thought to think of it that way. That's pretty cool. That's pretty amazing. If I was that little 12-year-old girl, I would be like, I don't believe you, because I'm a very skeptical person. So I would probably say, I don't believe you. That would probably never happen. But I hope it does. And so, yeah, you're right. So 36 years later, there it is. And I'm a part of it. And it just goes to show you that there was a reason why I fell in love with horse racing, and it sustained me through a wonderful broadcasting career that branched out into so many other different things. But the basis of my career on television and what brought me to broadcasting initially was my work covering horse racing. That was my foot in the door that led to all the other things that I was privileged to cover. So yeah, I think that little girl would be pretty amazed at what happened many years later.
Hmm. The 2017 Cotton Bowl between USC and Ohio State, that was the last assignment you had for ESPN. You covered the game for SportsCenter. What sort of emotions were you feeling throughout that day?
That was a very surreal day. That was a very surreal day. We did a bunch of live shots. I think my last live shot, I was sitting on a Texas Longhorn on the cow, a live cow in Fort Worth. And I did my live shot from that cow, that steer, whatever you want to call them. I don't think it was a bull, whatever it was. He had very long horns. That's all I know. And it was a neat feeling. And they did a little montage of some of my work that I didn't know was happening. I didn't know that was coming. And that kind of got me choked up a little bit, because I obviously couldn't see it because I was sitting on that steer in the middle of Fort Worth, but I could hear it in my ear, and I didn't know that that was coming. So it was kind of shocking, and it touched me. I got a little choked up there. And but it was neat to be there to cover the game. And I was just thankful that it was such a great assignment that I had. That was my last one. And it was an exciting game, and I was working with my favorite producer. And yeah, it was a surreal day, though, for sure, because it was bittersweet, knowing that was going to be it.
After the game, did you do anything special to celebrate?
Honestly, I don't remember. Isn't that awful? I think it was just such a late night. I don't think we did. I think we maybe went back to the hotel, to the bar, and had a drink or something. But I mean, I was never one to go out, stay out late or do anything like that when I was working. It was usually very, very long days, sometimes 18-hour days. So if I did do something, it was probably just go back to the hotel and have a drink and call it a day.
Nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with that. As
Yep.
I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, you are a coach's wife. You and Glenn got married in July 2013 when he was the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. And, it's a
Mhm.
truly remarkable story how you guys came together in the midst of tragic circumstances. So, from the start of the relationship to now being married for over a decade, what would you say makes your connection with Glenn so strong?
Well, I think he's a man of very high character. He has very traditional values, which I do, and I think that that is a very strong foundational element of our relationship. Um, just so much trust and respect for one another. And as you said, we did meet under tragic circumstances. His wife had passed away of heart disease at a young age, mid 40s, and they had two boys. And I happened to be assigned to cover his football game that week. And I told the story of he was not coaching on the field that day because, and I said why. And I said all the players got together and decided that they were going to honor his wife with a helmet sticker on the back of their helmets. And so I told that story, and they were playing at Texas A&M, and they were down by many at halftime. I think the score was like 28-3 or something ridiculous. And Glenn gave a little pep talk to the players in the locker room, and it was very emotional, as you can imagine, you know. And they ended up winning that game. So right then and there, that was just an amazing thing to be a part of, but I didn't know him yet at that point in time. So over the years, having become friends and knowing one another, and then we decided, to get married, and we dated long distance for quite a while. He is just a very loving person, and he has been through a lot of tragedy, and he knows what's important in life. And so I think that that is something that really keeps our relationship really strong, is that he is just a really good person. And everybody says that. Everybody that knows him says that. So that's not just my bias. But anyway, it ended up being kind of a learning curve for me, and a little bit of culture shock, going from being a single gal for many, many years, living alone, very independent with my dogs, and then being married to a coach. And I got to see the sport from an entirely new dimension, which kind of did help me with my football reporting, just having a better understanding of what goes on behind the scenes, and what it takes to make the sausage, and a lot more than people think. You have no idea the hours these guys work, the amount of days they put in. There's very little downtime, days off. And it just gave me a whole new appreciation. And I think that that really helped me in my reporting and my conversations with other coaches. And I also think that they afforded me a little bit more respect, and almost like more embracing me as one of them, because they knew, okay, she's married to a coach, she gets it, she's one of us, she knows what we deal with, she knows what it's like. And I just think that it gave me a little bit better understanding from a different perspective of the sport itself. And then I just felt like a lot of the other coaches were a little bit more open with me in how they related to me because of that. So it definitely created a whole new dynamic in my career, I would say, and how I approached my job.
In 2019, after Lane Kiffin left FAU and went to Ole Miss, Glenn, as the interim head coach, led FAU to a big victory in the 2019 Boca Raton Bowl. What was it like experiencing that with him?
It's so interesting that you bring that up, because that was such a unbelievable moment in time. It was just such a crazy time for us. We were living in Florida. Glenn is the defensive coordinator at FAU. They had a really wonderful season, and they end up winning the Conference USA championship game over UAB. We trounced them. And Lane announces right after that game, "Oh, I'm going to Ole Miss. I got the Ole Miss job." So it was like this roller coaster. You're up and down, you're up and down. It was a great season. You win the conference, you win 11 games or 10 games at that point, and just a great feeling because these guys work so hard, and it's so nice to see them have success because it's so fleeting. So Lane left immediately then after that game. So then we find out, okay, FAU is going to the Boca Raton Bowl, and Glenn was made interim head coach. And so in the meantime, there is nobody sort of honchoing the team or the wives. So I kind of took control, and Charlie Weiss's wife, Jen, he was the offensive coordinator. She and I kind of put together a Christmas party for the staff. There was just a lot going on behind the scenes in a very short amount of time that we were like, we need to do this because we need to have like a thank you holiday party for the staff. We just won the Conference USA. It doesn't matter what happens in the bowl game because this is just a great achievement for this whole staff. So we worked on that. We're putting that together. Glenn is fielding offers of other jobs because, now it's a transition because there's going to be a coaching change. And so there were interviews, and he's trying to coach the team for the bowl game. And we didn't have a lot of time because it was an early bowl game. And then he's interviewing for the FAU job. And then Lane wanted him to come to Ole Miss. And then it was like a million different things going on. Then just a few days before the bowl game, Glenn finds out that I think 10 or 11 of his players cannot play in the game. They're suspended because they didn't make academic eligibility. So he's losing, I don't know, 5 or 6 at least starters and just 10, 11 key guys. Playing SMU, who had one of the most potent offenses in the country. They were favored to win the game. And Glenn is like, this is going to be a disaster. He's like, I don't know how we're going to pull this off without these 10, 11 guys. I don't know what's going to happen. He's like, I know we're practicing good, but this could be a disaster. And FAU ends up winning the game. It was unbelievable. It was so emotional. I was so happy for the whole team, the players, for my husband, of course. He worked so hard. And it was just such an emotional roller coaster that it was nice to see it end on a happy note. It was thrilling, really. It was a really thrilling ride, and I was very proud of him.
That's amazing. That's so amazing that you got to experience that with your husband. And I
Yeah.
noticed that after the game, you posted this amazing photo of the game ball just laying by itself in bed, and I just thought that was perfect. Chef's kiss.
Exactly. It was like, oh, this is what it's all about. This is it. We were just, we were overjoyed, you know? It was so emotionally draining, the whole thing with him, with the job interviews and trying to manage the team. And, Lane is gone, and let's take care of the staff and do right by the staff. And oh, and then when he found out that those players couldn't play, he was crushed. So to pull that off and to have that win and to absolutely spank SMU, which is what they did. And even Sonny Dyke said after the game, he said, you guys spanked us. You guys were the better team, better coached, better prepared. You played better. He's like, I don't know how you pulled it off without all those players, but it was just such a neat feeling. And so to have that game ball, it was like, I just got to take a picture of that. It's just one of those funny little things that you do, when you're riding that roller coaster. It's pretty neat.
Yep, absolutely. Now, last question here. What is the biggest piece of advice that you have for aspiring sports broadcasters?
Well, I would say, there are so many pieces that go into the puzzle that can make somebody good at what they do. And you have to be lucky and fortunate and in the right place at the right time, which is sort of what happened to me. But be willing to work hard. Be willing to work hard. Volunteer to do whatever menial tasks or assignments come along. Work really hard. Hone your writing skills. Even though I didn't have any professional training or schooling in journalism, I was always very good in English and writing, and my writing skills were always very solid. And that sort of helped me make that transition from being a horse trainer to then being a reporter. So hone your writing skills, be curious, always be curious and observant. There is nothing that is a stupid question or a stupid observation. If you see something that catches your eye, even if you think it's insignificant, chances are the audience watching at home doesn't know about that, or they may be curious about it too. So curiosity, being observant, being a really good writer and learning how to condense your writing into as few words as possible, and being relatable, developing relationships with people and showing that you respect them, their time, their story, what they bring to the table, just having respect for your sources and what they tell you and never breaching that trust. All those things go into making someone very employable as a broadcaster. And then it's just a matter of developing poise and confidence and let your personality come through. I think that's the main thing, is don't try to be someone that you're not. Let your personality come through, which took me many years to be able to do, only because I was very nervous at first, and it took me years to get over the nerves. And you gain confidence with reps. The more reps you get, the more confident you will get. And once you have that confidence and that poise, then your persona and your style will shine through in everything that you bring to the telecast.
Well, that is some fantastic advice, Jeannine. And thank you so much for letting me have this opportunity to talk with you today. It was truly, truly an honor.
Well, you are very good at what you do. And may I say, I'm impressed with your preparation. And, it's my pleasure. I'm always happy to talk about horses or football or television. So thank you for your preparation. And it was a pleasure to chat with you.